This is the Equity Charter podcast, where we talk about why we care about equity in the digital health sector and why we think you should too. Welcome to this week's episode of the Equity Charter podcast. My name is Aisha Rahim and I'm a psychiatrist and Chief Clinical Information Officer working in the NHS. Along with my colleagues Hassan Chowdhury and Victoria Betton, we developed 10 principles for embedding equity within the digital health sector. This week, we'll be looking at Principle 5, which is digital teams represent the wider workforce and communities they serve. So here to discuss this topic with us today, we have our two experts, Shera Chok and Natasha Phillips. Welcome to the show, Shera and Natasha.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha.
Delighted.
All right, so what we'll do is we'll start off by asking you a little bit about yourself. So Shera, if I start with you, can you say a little bit about yourself and your current role, please?
Oh, thank you, Aisha. So thrilled to be here today. So my name is Shera Chok. I am the chair and founder of the Shuri Network. I'm a GP by background, and my other roles include working with the London Ambulance as a non-exec director on the board. I work with the NIHR as the national lead for research in community settings. And I also have just started a role with Bart's Health Charity on the trust decision-making group.
Thank you. And the same question to you, Natasha. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, I am a nurse. I guess if you cut me in half, it would say nurse right through the middle. So that's what I identify as primarily. And I've been nursing for about 30 years. I was formerly the Chief Nursing Information Officer for NHS England, the first of type in that role. So I guess I'm a digital nurse specialist as well. And I left the NHS back in 2023. So I am an independent consultant who supports the NHS with digital transformation. I'm the founder of something called Future Nurse Community, which is a not-for-profit organisation supporting nurses in digital health. And I advise the health tech companies. And the last thing I do in my sort of portfolio is I am a professor at the University of Salford.
Thank you very much. So both extremely busy, extremely experienced. So I'd just like to start by asking, maybe we'll stick with yourself, Natasha. What first got you interested in focusing on workforce diversity specifically?
I think in my heart I have a very strong justice driver, Aisha, and I am quite an annoying person who likes to say when I see injustice, and as a nurse in the digital sphere, I kind of saw an injustice in that there wasn't enough of a nursing voice for what is essentially half of the clinical workforce in the NHS were really not having their voices heard in digital health. So that was a key driver for me in terms of thinking, how do I make sure that this group of people, mostly female, are really well represented? And one of the reasons I think it's really important that they're really well represented is because that in doing so, they bring another voice, the voice of the patient, from the perspective that they interact with the patient to the work that they do. So that was really key to me. But I guess if I go way back in my career about workforce per se, when I arrived in the NHS, I wondered why people were making it so difficult for us to do our jobs. And I've always had a passion to make it easier for nurses, midwives and anyone working in healthcare to do their jobs more easily so that they can give better care.
Thanks, Natasha. And Shera, what about yourself? What first sparked your interest in this field, do you think?
So it wasn't a deliberate decision, but I've been in the NHS for over 30 years, and the NHS is nothing without the people who work in the NHS. And whether that's in primary care, in ambulance, in mental health, community, acute. I mean, I am in awe of what our staff do every single day, every second of the day. And so without our staff, we wouldn't be able to deliver any transformation, digital quality, safety, service redesign. And so I suppose for me, it's about how do we support our staff to deliver the best possible care to the patients and service users? That's what it boils down to. And it was, for me, an eye-opening moment. I remember exactly the moment when the idea of the Shuri Network came to me 8 years ago. And there are points in your life where you think it could have gone either way. I went to the Digital Health Summer School 8 years ago in Birmingham, and I looked around the room at the other 300 or 400 other digital leaders. Nobody looked like me. And there were maybe 4 or 5 other women from diverse ethnic minorities in the entire conference. And I could have chosen to shut my eyes and say, well, it's interesting. I've done well. Not my problem to sort out. It's HR's problem or the EDI team's problem. But I thought, this is not right. It does not mirror what I see when I walk around a GP practice or ED or a community health service or an acute ward. So why is there this disjoint between people leading digital transformation and the people working on the front line? And it was that moment that changed my life and gave rise to the Shuri Network, because I chose to say, well, if there are only 4 of us in this space, and that includes you, Aisha, because I think you were the only woman from a diverse background who spoke on stage, let's get the 4 or 5 of us together and let's try and change this.
Do you know that, Shera, that was really... the year after that, when you did summer school, that was one of those light bulb moments for me as well. It was a really inspiring moment because, like you, I also felt, as a woman, it wouldn't have felt such a narrow group as it does to you, obviously, but it still felt like very narrow. I was like, where's all the people like me? Where are the other women? And where are the other nurses in this space? It felt like a very white male space. And I thought, this just doesn't feel right. And then on stage... arrived this row, I can still see them, of women of colour, of really different clinic backgrounds, you know. So we had Heather Caudle, who's a really inspiring nursing colleague of mine, yourselves on the stage, and importantly, sharing your stories, which is kind of different to how they did digital health summer school or Rewired before as well. And I remember the room erupted at the end of that, and everybody, even all the white men, stood up and were like, something's just happened here, something major. And it was really uplifting for everybody in the room. So I applaud you for doing that, because you enabled other people to use their voice and be seen.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You could have heard a pin drop actually during that session. People were holding their breath. And it was one of those moments I will never forget.
Yeah, no, I completely recall every second of that interaction, really. And I still have people that come up to me now, and I'm sure you get the same as well, Sheri, who say, oh, I remember when the Shuri Network was launched. And, they also note that as a specific inflection point for them to think about that workforce diversity piece that perhaps they hadn't really had to think about in any great depth until that session.
It really inspired me then to go to John Hoaxma, the then leader of the Digital Health Network. I'd just been given a job. I knew that I could be CNIO for NHS England, but only one person can only do so much. So community was really important. And I felt responsibility. I'd gone in with the idea of liberating and bringing voice to a group of people who could make a difference, but with a very limited budget. So inspired by you, I said, you could help me put on a nursing summit. And so we decided that Rewired would be the place where we would have this summit. And I'll never forget, but there was this bit of a panic at the desk because too many nurses arrived and they couldn't get them all in the building on time. And I remember a CIO coming at one point up to where we were doing our nursing thing, which was kind of separate. And what I love to see in Rewired now is it's much more integrated, but going, oh, this feels really different. And this is amazing. One of my colleagues was there with her 8-week-old baby. It was just a different vibe and people feeling part of something. And it came from that initial, if you just ask and if you just challenge a little bit, perhaps there's room for these other voices. And that's I think, what I've seen the job to, what I saw my old job to be and what I see my current job to be, is to try and push and allow other people then to use their voice and be seen.
Oh, that's really nice to know, actually, Natasha. I didn't know that we'd inspired that. So it's lovely to know that we have inspired other networks and other movements. I mean, all credit to John Hoaxma, the digital health team, Lauren, Neil, Chris, and the rest of the team. They have been incredible since day one. And they continue to support diversity. And you can see the difference in the audience and on stage at the digital health, the Rewired, the summer school. It has completely changed the face of who's there and who's speaking. But we'll come back to that because that's not the case in all conferences.
No, and that's a really good point to segue on to, actually, because there has been progress made in the last 6-7 years, as we've just alluded to. but we haven't cracked this yet as a sector by any stretch of the imagination. So I was wondering, Shuri, I mean, do you want to give your perspective on where the bottlenecks are that still exist? Where are we still not making good progress?
Yeah, happy to. I think there are two that spring to mind. One, we've seen programs on the clinical side. So I think in terms of CCIOs, CNIOs, I have seen more diversity in terms of profession, in terms of ethnicity. The bit that is still struggling is the CIO, CTO side. And I've actually seen numbers drop there in terms of women from diverse ethnic backgrounds, because when we launched the network 7 years ago, I put a slide up and say, these are the 5 women who are in these roles. Sonia Patel's one of them, Saraj Patel, Sarah Jensen, and a few others. That number has dropped. And it's just, it makes my heart very sad, but also quite, it's a whole range of emotions. It's like, why is that number dropping? Why are we not focusing on the digital talent pipeline, particularly when digital health is front and center of the 10-year plan? If we invest in technology without investing in the people leading and developing that technology and using that technology, it's a false economy. It will take longer to implement. We will develop products that don't meet the needs of our service users. And it will cost a lot more to implement because people will simply not engage with something that doesn't meet their needs. So that's one bottleneck. The second bottleneck is I went to a recent digital summit and I was so triggered because there were 3 all-male panels, one after another, in the same morning. Looking around the room, it was probably about a 14-to-1 male to female gender imbalance as well. And it was an invitation-only summit. And I got so triggered, it brought me all the way back to 8 years ago. In fact, it was worse because it's 2026 and it's really not acceptable now.
It is interesting, isn't it? Because when I go to conferences now, if I see a panel that is not diverse and purely consists of one demographic, and usually that's white and usually that's male because of the industry and the sector that we work in, it actually sticks out like a sore thumb. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I think one of the great things about the work that we're all doing in our various guises is actually raising that awareness so that people take note of this and how unusual it is compared with the communities that we serve, and also the people that are working in our teams, perhaps at the more junior levels as well. They really don't reflect the workforce as a whole. I'm just wondering if we could explore that point about a team creating products that don't meet the needs of a population without having that diversity of thought. And I just wondered if either of you had examples of how this can play out when we don't get this right.
And I think we've seen several huge examples where it's gone wrong. For example, women's health, wearables that don't measure menstrual cycles. Who would develop a wearable that's designed to be used by millions of people without something as fundamental as that? Pulse oximeters that don't measure oxygen levels as accurately in dark skin as they do white skin. Like, how? Why? How did that get through safety processes? And facial recognition systems used by other sectors. We've seen cases where it's gone horribly wrong. And then AI, of course, with data sets that are inherently skewed because data has been collected from certain segments of the population and not from others. And so it's, as Natasha says, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
I remember a really inspiring member of our community who's a midwife, early career midwife. And this speaks to the point of creating opportunity and how structures can be a barrier, so create a structural boundary, or the entire opposite. So Ruby is a midwife, and in her nurse training, they had an innovation module, which is quite unusual in nurse training as they try and squeeze in everything that you need to do. Great. So Ruby's thinking innovation. She also goes on a placement, an international placement to Ghana. And what she recognises is they're much better at recognising jaundice in babies of colour in Ghana. She's got 2 new bits of information in her mind. She's thinking, how can I put these together? Comes back, manages to get on the clinical entrepreneur programme, and Ruby's developed an app, which she's commercialised so that it's more freely available to the NHS, so more midwives can recognise jaundice in babies of colour. Bloody brilliant. But that's Ruby. It happened to have just the right circumstances and probably a bit of tenacity. And currently on the clinical entrepreneur program, for instance, only 6% of the participants are nurses and midwives, because there's some structural boundary to the way those mostly women are trained that's stopping them accessing that. And I think that's that's where we need to be looking really, really hard and questioning ourselves really deeply as to how do we tackle some of that to enable the Rubies to come up with the ideas about how we do things better for the communities that we serve.
And that's an absolutely fantastic example of the real world impact of having that diversity of thought and experience and clinical background and professional background in developing new tools that actually work for a broader range of society. But I just wanted to develop that point about how do we attract people into these roles, because what I often hear, and I always feel a little bit frustrated when I hear this, is that if we don't have a proportion of our workforce that represent society, well, those people just aren't applying for the jobs, and that always seems like a bit of a cop-out to me. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about how you respond to that statement that often gets made in this context.
I just find that very funny, because actually we seem to find leaders from Australia and America and seek them out. Now, I'm sure they weren't actively going to apply for those jobs, but we managed to find people from different continents, but certain continents, who look a certain way and speak a certain way. So are they hard to reach, or do we make an active effort to find them? And if we can do that for people from Australia or America, why are we finding it so hard to find people under our noses in our organisations, in our trusts, in primary care? They're not hard to reach. We're just not trying hard enough or building those relationships with groups that perhaps people don't mix with normally.
Yeah, I agree, Shera. I think there's just I think it's a lazy answer, really, isn't it? That you have to think a bit more deeply about, so what are we doing, and why might people feel not able to put themselves forward, or even able to take the time to see the opportunities to put themselves forward, because they're working really hard somewhere just trying to survive in terms of doing their day-to-day job. And when I looked at some of our innovation programs, for instance, and looked at how people apply for them, to me there were, as an assessor, some really obvious structural boundaries that I thought, well, if you don't take a person from point A to point B, they can't get to point C. So therefore, what are we doing about the movement from point A to point B? And even if I go back to my time as CNIO for NHS England, when I started, there were 20% of trusts that had a CNIO. And when I left, it was over 80%. Wow. Because people did not think that was a role that was needed. And so there had to be some work in terms of making the case for why it might be useful, and leveraging some influence from different people to say this is a thing that we need to have in order to open up a suite of roles that people could apply for. But then there was in terms of, we could go, oh, tick, job done, brilliant. If in my role in the past, I go, oh, I can put that on my CV, that looks nice. But if I question myself a bit more deeply about that, it's not the job done, because there's lots of box ticking. And have we created equal opportunity for people to apply for those jobs? Probably not. If we look at those jobs, they anything from a band 6 to a band 9. So there's a lot of work to do in terms of saying, have we created a role that's realistic for people to get and then stay in? I always remember, again, going back to that time of the rewire, and very senior nursing colleagues saying, oh, we've got a challenge in nursing because, we have a bit of a ceiling here where we need to have more colleagues from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds in senior roles, but you seem to have cracked it here. And I'm like, well, I haven't really, but we've got a bunch of CNIs, but some of those are band 6 and band 7. So let's not get complacent. And I think complacency in this is a really important word that we need to always just be going, let's think a bit harder about this and then think what we do next to keep pushing forward.
Yeah, and you've alluded to this in terms of those inclusive recruitment practices, because I think, a lot of people out there do genuinely want to attract the broadest pool of talent, but they often feel a little bit stuck in terms of making that a reality. So I'm just wondering if either of you had any tips or suggestions for people wanting to recruit in a more inclusive manner for how they might make that a reality.
I suppose my advice would be connect with the Shuri Network, because we have run the Digital Fellowship Programme now for 4 years. We've just launched Cohort 5 with NHS England. And I was looking at the data sent to me from our alumni team a couple of weeks ago, and we have about 105 active alumni members. So 40% of them have gained a job promotion. And bearing in mind, not everyone wants a new job. And of that 40%, 22% have gone up by at least 2 bands.
Wow.
And if you think about it, many of these women have told us that they have been stuck in at a certain band, whether that's 5, 6, 7, for up to 15 years, trying and trying again and being rejected time and time again, and almost at the point of leaving the profession. And the majority of them are nurses and midwives, because that's how the funding for the fellowship happened for the first 3 cohorts. And then you give them the confidence, you give them role models that look like them, that sound like them, that aren't so different to them. You know, people like us who are just normal. We sound normal. We look normal. And we say to them, you can do this. You aren't that far away. And we give them coaching. We give them a bit of knowledge and skills and a lot of self-belief. And it completely transforms them. It changes their lives, both professionally, but also, they say, personally. It changes them as mothers, as daughters, as wives, as people. So it can be done. And so my advice to people would be engage with the network, because we can help you to do this.
I agree. And I think that is, both our networks aim to do a similar thing, but we're investing in the individual, and the onus is still on the individual. So I would say to people recruiting, who also have a responsibility, is to be really curious and really challenge yourself about your processes in order to make sure that you are truly open and attracting the widest group of people. And you can do that in all sorts of ways. And like, for instance, one of the things that I found quite useful is reverse mentoring, because it really helps me to think differently and learn from someone else's experiences, because I make a lot of assumptions based on my own lived experience and where I come from, which also has some privilege, some disadvantage, but certainly some privilege. So being really curious about that can help me think differently about how I might make my processes more accessible to other people. And I think all organisations, it's incumbent on them to do that, and not in a tick box way, like genuine curiosity and genuine openness to doing things differently, to invite different people to bring their lived experience, their knowledge and their expertise to the work, and you definitely would reap the benefits of it. And I think the last thing I would say on that particular question is also, I think we're often afraid of getting it wrong. I know I am, that I might somehow say the wrong thing and therefore appear racist, sexist, whatever it might be. I somehow get it wrong because I don't understand. And I still wrestle with that all of the time. In fact, even coming on something like this makes me nervous that I might say the wrong thing and something might come back at me that says, you really don't understand. But I think sharing that vulnerability and being prepared to do that is the first step to really being inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely, because actually none of us get this right 100% of the time. And I think being humble enough to say, actually, this is a learning journey for me, for everybody, we'll try and be better tomorrow than we were today. I think that goes a long way, doesn't it?
Definitely. I loved your point, Aisha, on your last podcast where you said how much you'd learned about EDI just by deciding that you were doing the equity charter. You thought, I'd better go and swat up on this. And how much you've learned. That was very comforting to me.
Oh, for sure. So, I mean, I'm a woman of colour, but that doesn't necessarily automatically make me an expert by any means around equality and diversity, because people from ethnic minority backgrounds, of course, come from all manner of different backgrounds. And, I happen to be Pakistani, but that doesn't mean that I understand every person that is of a Pakistani background and how their lived experience looks like. So I think you're right. I mean, you've talked about this as well, Natasha, that spirit of curiosity, I think, is really important, and that willingness to listen and to learn and to try and improve yourself, as we all do in all manner of our jobs, I think. And this is no different from my perspective. And I also think about those other practices that address hidden disabilities, for example. So things like when you're in an interview situation, I think there's been a lot of movement around providing applicants or interviewees with the questions for the interview in advance, because putting somebody on the spot doesn't really replicate the challenges of doing those roles most of the time. And actually, there's something about leveling that playing field as well for people that actually would benefit from having that information in advance. And actually, if you give everybody that information in advance, you probably will get a better sense of how people perform, rather than putting them in these unnatural positions that don't really simulate real day-to-day practice, I suppose. So I think there are probably a number of things that we can do, and that they are all additive. And I don't think there is any one silver bullet necessarily, but being thoughtful, I think, about how you recruit feels like an important thing. Now, Natasha, you talked about Future Nurse, and I was just wondering if you could expand on that and tell us a little bit more about the organisation, its purpose, and what you do.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess it's an extension of that passion for my professional pride and passion, and belief that this professional workforce has lots more to offer in the digital health space, and haven't necessarily had the platform and the voice to do that. So when I left NHS England, I remember being with a whole bunch of colleagues and talking about what I might do. And Future Nurse was just an experiment. I remember someone said, "Oh, look, that website's for sale. Why don't we buy it?" So I did. And I thought I would just consult, but I couldn't quite leave the idea behind that community is everything, in our way to deliver real changes through community and people. And the world, my world would have shrunk in terms of I could do good work into NHS organisations, but how are we going to do mobilising this workforce? We've done something over 3 years. There was more to do. It's great that there's a CNIO in England doing that all the time, but there's an opportunity to do so much more, and that people often need to seek support outside of their own organisation. So hence very light touch, set up a community, set up a LinkedIn, set up a website, attracted some people. I think we're over 2,000 members now. But our core purpose is to bring nurses and health tech much closer together in dialogue in order to deliver better care. And so all the work we do is around bringing the expertise of those two communities together, whether that be through networking and events, through to education, and ultimately to ideation, and to create a new narrative about what nursing is and can be, really, to start to inform some of those bigger discussions. So I describe us as a bit of a think and do tank.
And what feedback have you had from participants and members of your community in terms of the impact that it's had on them?
Huge, really. And what always makes me feel I must keep going, even when I feel a bit worn out with it, truth be told, is the ask of the community to say, we need that support. This, how do I get involved? How do I build career? How can you help me? How can we help each other? So I feel it's incumbent on me to keep that community going, and the best way they can do it is through all the connections that we make. And then our role as an organisation is really to either fill a gap, or where there's not, signpost people to the right thing. And if I think of people like Ada, who is one of our early career nurses, you know, she would say she's had opportunities that she didn't have before. So we're working with Wessex Hin, for instance, on a small research project to look at the barriers to innovation in nursing practice, with an ambition to do more beyond that when we understand the problem, staying curious in order to put interventions in place. Well, Ada is a fellow and she gets to be part of that research team. So instead of her experience, which is fantastic, and Ada will do brilliant by herself, let me just say. She's an inspiring woman, but she has boundaries that she works in within her own organisation. What she would say is, you've opened these boundaries, and I'm now working with a wider group and in a HIN, and I'm learning an awful lot from that.
Amazing. And I know, Shera, from your perspective, that community is a really important part of the Shuri Network as well. And I know that whenever there are events, you've always spoken really passionately about how that energises you. And I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I recently found out that Shuri means little village in Japanese, I think, and it's just perfect, because that wasn't what I knew when we started it 7 years ago. So the Shuri Network is a national network that empowers women from diverse ethnic groups to succeed and thrive in digital health. What we also do is to help the NHS and care to deliver the digital transformation that our patients and our staff deserve. And then lastly, to help us to deliver the 3 shifts in the 10-year plan and the digital priorities and ambitions in the 10-year plan, because AI is all over the plan, but so are the 5 big bets. So is digitization, data platforms, and so on. And I suppose it's always really heartwarming to hear from our members and our fellows about the impact it's had on their lives. And I've shared a little bit about that earlier on. But I wanted to share our values because that's at the center of what we're trying to do. And that's lift as you climb. So we will help our members and support them as much as we can. But in turn, we expect a very powerful ripple effect, because if every person we help and support helps 5 other women or 5 other people around them, whether that's in their communities, at work, that will have a huge effect that escalates. And our values are all about collaboration. It's about innovation, creating safe spaces for us to have discussions and share our experiences, and to use our voice. Because all of us have a voice and a platform, and we provide you with that platform, because some of these voices have been suppressed or ignored for many years. And then suddenly we're creating opportunities and opening doors that have been firmly shut for years. And when you see our fellows and members suddenly fly and blossom, and that light that shines out of them, it really is remarkable. And I'm so grateful for the network, because it's given me that opportunity to meet so many incredible people over the last 7 years.
And these communities, they become self-sustaining as well, don't they? That energy that you talk about, that people, that buzz, that good feeling that you get, it then spills forward into all manner of different areas that those individuals are also part of all those other networks. So I think it is very much an additive effect. It's great to hear about these initiatives, and we'll put links in the show notes to this podcast for both Future Nurse and the Shuri Network. So if people do want to find out more, they can click on those links and find out. So we're moving on to the end of the podcast. So I'm just going to ask you both one last question, if that's all right. So if you have somebody that is really keen to improve the diversity of the team that they lead or that they are recruiting to, what single bit of advice would you give them for moving things on a further step? And if I come to yourself, Natasha, first.
I think really it touches on what we've said before, which is be brave, be curious. It starts with a conversation. I think it starts one conversation at a time. You know, it's rare that one conversation creates a change, although occasionally it can. It's often a build up. So have some tenacity and keep raising your ideas in the conversation, and involve as many people as possible. Even think a little bit crazily and outside of the box about who you might be involving when you're thinking about how you're going to shape the team that you want of the future. And the last thing I'd say is, I think it's interesting because we've talked about 2 networks, but I don't know that people always see the world as interconnected as I do. But I think be involved in as many, be curious about the world around you, and be involved in as many networks as possible to sort of expand your thinking and cross-pollinate and be allies to each other, is the way that you achieve the sort of larger scale sort of social movement type stuff that we would like to see in our world.
Love that, Natasha. Thank you. Shera, what about you?
Probably very similar. I think the 3 things. 1, talk to people. Go use your 5 senses, walk around your trust or your ICB or your federation, and just look at who's actually on the front line, and then go back to your senior management team meetings or your exec meetings or your informatics leadership team meetings. And if there is a completely different group, then I think ask the question, why? Where are the women? Where are the people of protected characteristics? Where are the people from diverse ethnic backgrounds, people with disabilities, people of different ages? Why are they not around the table? Ask that question. If you're a senior person, you probably have more freedom to ask those questions of your team, and don't take such shallow answers, because there will be all sorts of excuses, like they don't apply, or we just can't find them, or they're hard to reach, things that we've already touched on. Do not take excuses and do not accept them. just say it's not good enough. Why are they not applying? What can we do better? Connect with the Shuri Network. If you want to speak to alumni or fellows or members from your organization, we could potentially help you connect with them for you to hear their experience. What is it like for a woman of color who wants to be a CIO? What are the barriers that she faces? Or a nurse who wants to become a CNIO or a CIO? Talk to people. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. And then lastly, with every digital program being implemented, always question, well, what are the risks of excluding certain groups? Where is the equity impact assessment? With AVT, it's often an afterthought. If you're a CIO or a digital leader, it should not be an afterthought. It should be there right from the beginning of the pilot of AVT. Unfortunately, I think if we did a survey across all trusts implementing AVT, whether they've done an EIA, whether they actually looked at who might be excluded, I think that would be a really interesting piece of work.
That's a great challenge and some really helpful calls to action there from both of you. So all that remains for me to do now is to thank you both for your time. Thank you, Shera. Thank you, Natasha. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Equity Charter podcast. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the series. And if you'd like to know more, go to our website at www.equitycharter.digital. You can follow our page on LinkedIn, join our community of practice, and you can also contact us at hello@equitycharter.digital.